religion was not working for me, and I was not about to go be finding Jesus in some church. So the occult thing kind of called out to me, and but I took it very seriously that I knew the legend of Jesus, and that our soul had immense worth, and that there was a karmic repercussion for everything we do, good and bad. That's the law of compensation through the law of karma. And I took all that very seriously as someone who so desperately wanted to leave here. I also did not want to accidentally reincarnate here. I also accidentally didn't want to get stuck here with regret and have my soul stay here forever in haunting regret that I killed myself instead of dealt with my demons. Hello there. Well, hello. My name is Molly Skye Brown, and I am the host of my podcast, Let's Be Frank, where I talk about my buddy, my imaginary friend, my friend Ghosty from childhood, Jesus, Frank the Messiah. And I'm so excited to start this podcast. It's insane. He's really excited too. He's been talking about it all day to me. Like, he's really excited for me to be this weird. He said very few people agree to be this weird with him. So I've signed up. So I'm really excited about this. I'm not quite sure what I'm even doing. I'm not quite sure how I'm even doing this. But that's the walk with faith, is figuring it out. I don't have to know the how. I just follow the steps when they come, and they come. And that's also what I'm going to talk about on this podcast, is my walk with God, my walk with divinity, my walk with the universe, my walk with Jesus, my walk with faith, my walk with magic, my walk with spirituality, and how I manifest it all, and how we're always manifesting. And that's something Jesus explained to me, clarified for me, and I so appreciate it. And he's asked for me to help clarify that for others. He says it's a big misconception. The whole process of manifesting is poorly misconstrued. But it's, getting there. And he says we'll figure it out soon enough, and it will be very boring here, because it'll be so easy. Once you know how to manifest properly through your awareness, it's a game changer. It's like realizing you're Neo in the Matrix when you really, 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 really learn the rules and let them integrate the rules, the laws, and learn to play the game. It changes everything. You become reborn knowing the truth, and you start a whole new life and a whole new journey with a covenant with the Holy Spirit, with the Lord, with God, whatever you're comfortable having this covenant with, the universe. Think Luke Skywalker in Star Wars has a covenant with the Force, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Because I know a lot of people have a lot of religious programming, and I completely get that. I had a tremendous religious programming, and extensive programming of just being a human being on Earth. I mean, there's a big program running here. It kind of dictates what our life is. I mean, if we were to sum up what it's like to be a human, it's pretty much the same for everyone. Wake up and freak out. How the hell am I going to live another day? And then do it again the next day. And whether it's finding food to eat, or if you live in the civilized world, it's finding money to get the things you need for the food and the things. And God has told me, and Jesus has told me, that this is a pay-to-play reality, and that money is neutral, and we should learn how to manifest it and learn how to play the game. We need the light people, the light workers, the spiritual people, the lovely people that want to make the planet a better place in the name of Jesus, in the name of God, and actually know the real versions of Jesus and God are literal love, true love, 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 love. Do not argue with me. It is love. And if you know a different God, then I don't want to play with that. But to know that the original source is pure love, unconditional love, for the sake of a gigantic, insane experiment in the name of science and spirituality and evolution and confirmation and in chaos, then you are on an epic journey. You're on an epic adventure with the divine. And the laws of manifesting, the force, is available to anyone who's aware it exists, right? Yoda helps train Luke because he's really familiar with the force. Jesus is totally my Yoda. And so this is the story that I want to tell of how I came to find my Jesus Yoda, my Yoda Jesus, my Frank the Messiah. And how he helped me to deprogram myself like really, really, really quickly, enough to, gosh, it was in the same day that I saw him again in 2015, that, I mean, he charmed me that day. For sure. He won me over in that one day. This podcast is my show where I share my spiritual journey of awakening and finding Jesus, and how that came to be from someone who was really, really mad at Jesus for many, many years, but also had some pretty freaky, weird gifts all growing up all her life, and memories and validation of a friend ghosty from the ages of 5 and younger, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I had a friend ghosty for several years in my childhood that we would even see some sort of visual confirmation of whether it was able to make a chair move or able to manipulate the radio dial when talking about friend ghosty. So this was my full circle so far of what life is, a continual spiral, it seems. But this is my full circle of where I've come so far, of what I've made sense of my life and what I've made sense of all this very weird observation of being human as Molly Skye Brown. Well, most of it growing up is Molly Skye Beaton, which is a funny story too. You know, when I was little, my dad used to call me the unsinkable Molly Brown, and then that manifested. So I want to talk also about manifestation. I'm really good at manifesting, and I don't know how or why. Actually, I do, because Jesus is like, yes, you do. We explain it. We talk to you all the time about it. You know what it is. Okay. I didn't at the time really have a huge awareness of it until my mom when I was like middle school in the 80s, 90s. My mom was really interested in all the spiritual stuff. So she was catching wind of the Esther Hicks movement, the law of attraction and manifesting. So she would tell me about it. And this is also while I'm being raised pretty strict Catholic. I mean, we were strict and then we weren't, but I mean, I went to full-on Catholic school with a huge tuition and church like once a week during school with full uniforms and bloody dead Jesus hanging from every freaking wall of every room. So kind of hardcore. That was 2nd and 3rd grade, and then also 8th grade. So while not all the time, because we moved quite a bit, 3 years and completing of all the rituals, even up to marriage, going through pre-Cana. I have done all the rituals of Catholicism. Married Jesus when I was 8, like a good girl. Learned communion, and so this is a lot of my story. Is figuring out who this Jesus guy was and why I should care. And also at the same time, reconciling that at the same exact time, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, a little bit of 1st grade, I was being sexually stalked by a friend's father that lived 3 houses down. And so this is the exact same time that I'm starting to understand religion, and that religion, according to Jesus and purity and being good enough for God, it has a lot to do with your virginity as a girl. And around the same time, I told my imaginary friend to bug off. I didn't want to hear from it anymore. I was really mad at it. Was the same time that that man raped me when I was 9. And I was really mad at God after that. I've gone back in visions at that moment in my life and saw that angels cried the day that happened. But at the time, I didn't understand why it happened. I didn't even understand what was happening. And I'm sorry, I'm crying on my first podcast. I'll try to do a second take if I have to, but I've been in trauma therapy since January to be ready to tell my story and do this podcast because I have been telling Jesus for the past, and God for the past 3 years, I'm not ready for any of this. But I am, and we all are. And I know we all struggle with this. I'm not the lone wolf here, or the lone sheep, or the lone whatever. It can feel really intense being a human. And this is something Jesus really understands. So I had a really, really tough time swallowing Catholicism. The message I was receiving was I was somehow responsible for that beautiful man's murder on a cross. Like, it was more than my brain could comprehend at second grade level about this guy, Jesus. I mean, before that, I hadn't gone to really Catholic school. I'd been christened into the church, right away. Within the first 10 days, I was born, had a christening down in LA. My dad is born and raised in Hollywood, Southern California. So that's where I was christened into the church, in some creepy old church down there. Really beautiful, beautiful places. But man, I took my family, my husband and my son recently in December. We went back to Monterey, California, because this is where this took place. And I haven't been back since I was 14. I think it was 13, 14 years old last time I was in the Bay Area. And I am 42 now, but this was December, so I was 41. And we went and we had a beautiful time, and we revisited history. And I had done a lot of trauma therapy work to be able to go back to that place and not freak out, confronting it and letting it go and releasing it, because that man is dead that did that to me. And he has been dead since, I think it was 1996. And that was when I was a senior in high school. But so the topic of Let's Be Frank, and the story that I'm spinning circles into getting, even though it's my favorite story to tell and I can't wait to get into it, is so Frank is Jesus. Jesus is Frank. I'll tell the story in just a moment of why I called him Frank, because I'm very sassy and he's very sweet and pretty sassy back also, and very funny. And then it's also an outlet of let's be frank. Let's talk about subjects frankly, as Frank, knowing that Frank means Jesus, right? We're all speaking code here. We're all on the same page. We're all in the same tribe. We all in the same group, on the same frequency, same vibe. Frank is Jesus. Jesus is Frank. Let's be frank is the same as what would Jesus do? Let's be frank is let's look at everything from the perspective of Jesus, knowing the real Jesus. And I know it sounds incredibly convenient that I seem to know the real Jesus, but he won't leave me alone to just do this work. Just stand up and speak. Just listen to him. It's like a 3-way call. It's like a party line that I can hear. And I'll get into detail as to why I'm able to hear it so clearly, and what I have found to be some of the perhaps reasons as to why I can hear so clearly. And it's one of the main subjects of my book that is coming out hopefully this fall. That's what the manifestation date is for, is fall of 2020. to talk about manifesting and my life and knowing that Jesus is love, that he's smart, and that when I asked him what was the missing link back 2,000 years ago when you first came, and he said the lack of science to be able to prove quantum enmeshment and that we are all one. And now we're able to prove that. So, yeah, that's what he said was the main issue. But then I understood that, well, what he was saying was necessary of his first coming there. So he had to have a legacy. There had to be a huge legacy building up to the time when science was available to prove that back then. So it was a huge sacrifice to come in manifested through an incredible divine vein of blood worthy enough for us freaks on earth who demand human sacrifices and then say God's doing this. God wants blood. And it's like, wow, we just don't understand stuff, do we? And then Jesus came and said, God doesn't want blood, God wants love. And we were like, kill him. How dare he speak against the system? And so yeah, these are all the things Jesus and I talk about. And I really appreciate that he's incredibly candid, very vivid, and incredibly transparent. Oh my God, Jesus, you really did just have me say that. He's very funny. He's very punny. He's very witty. And he is not shy at all about coming through me with whatever I'll say. I am the one who's a little nervous. But I've got to know him again really, 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 really well. A big theme of my book, and a big theme of my journey, and a big theme of the topics that Jesus and I talk about is trauma and suffering, and why it's not necessary, but it is necessary to transform the trauma, is to be aware of the trauma. We don't need to be suffering, but we are suffering. But how do we relieve the suffering and then stop new suffering? That's the question. That's the answer. Is love, is heal the trauma, be aware of the trauma, know where the trauma came from, and the gift of trauma. So trauma is a gift as well. And this is a lot of stuff that Jesus and I talk about. The gift of trauma forces you to go inside to question, right? Any kind of trauma, whether it's weather trauma, a tornado, hurricane, freak accident, fire, burn your house down, flood, lightning strike, takes out everything, death in the family, sudden thing, any of these things, PTSD from war, PTSD from a murder that you're aware of in your family or saw or were connected to, PTSD from being abused, PTSD from causing abuse. This is all trauma. This is all trauma. Trauma recycles itself back into abuse, back into trauma, back into abuse, back into trauma, back into abuse. So we need to be aware of this to be able to stop it, because it's just a karmic loop that keeps recycling until we become aware and somebody stops the abuse out of sheer awareness and stops the ignorant. Oh, what was it, God? It was willful ignorance is what God said the number one problem with humans are. And that we're beautiful creatures, amazing creatures, incredible creatures. We have such potential. And that's what Jesus came to show us, our freaking potential, that we could be as glorious as him and walk on water. You can walk on water. You can walk on water. How is that? How is that? Jesus said that's a freaking level of belief is what that is. He's showing me that faith of a mustard seed. So, but as a kid, when I was in second grade, that's what I thought we were going to learn in Catholic school. I thought it was like Hogwarts, before I knew that Hogwarts was a thing. But I knew about the Hobbit, and I knew about magic, and I knew that they were parallel with faith. Magic and faith are very, very similar. Something outside of you is creating with you magic, whether that's divinity or whether that's witchcraft, whatever you want to call it. We're going to talk about all of the topics, all of the things through this show. That is the purpose of Let's Be Frank. It's our opportunity to get to know Jesus, how he's been showing himself to me and how he's been showing himself to others, and discuss things like adults, like Sweet, loving, open adults who can laugh and joke and see the truth, and not just an opportunity to be right, because we're not right and we're not wrong. Everything's right and everything's wrong. And we just need to see everything from the highest perspective, which is love. We need to see everything from the highest dimension, which is love. And look at every single problem that we have through the eyes of love. And you get the answer. The answer, oh my God, it's so clear. And that's what helps aid in manifesting, is understanding that God is love, and looking at every obstacle, every situation, every opportunity, every adventure, every moment through the eyes of love, of what am I learning, and what am I doing through the eyes of love? How do I finish this through the eyes of love? Like, what is the highest purpose of every situation? And you'll know what the next step is of how to complete it. So I know I'm rambling all over the place, and making many little rabbit trail holes. And that's going to be filled in my other podcast, talking about the twin flame journey and what Jesus has talked to me about, the twin flame expansion, of understanding more about the twin flame relationship, the twin flame experience, if you choose to have that, and how to know if you're having it, because there are a lot of twin flame options, is what he's told me. There are so many familiar reincarnates of past fractional pieces of ourselves that we've met and disconnected from along our multiple incarnations here. And they feel familiar at times. And they can sometimes elude us to believe that that's the person. And they're meant to. They're meant to. These are all things meant to help us hone our ability to tune in and ask for guidance, instead of following the 7 deadly sins, lust, those things. And they're sins just because you don't want to base a relationship strictly off of lust. If you guys have nothing in common and you guys can't play, and there's nothing else there, so that's all a sin is meant to mean. And we've talked about the 10 commandments, and we've talked about how the 10 commandments just mean, this is an outline how to check yourself before you wreck yourself, if you are in your God self. Because if you're committing any of these offenses, you're not in your highest self. You're not in your God self. You're not in your love self. And that's all that ever was. Because I remember being so triggered by the 10 commandments, first of all, that we needed a reminder not to kill and not to cheat. Like, get me off this rock. Really? Is that our mentality, to just hurt people, to hurt? So, a big part of my book, a big part of my talk, a big part of my journey, a big part of my story, a big part of my career, entrepreneurship, and coaching in life is about overcoming trauma and learning the gift of trauma. And the gift of trauma is, again, trauma causes you to go inward. And when you go inward, you ask questions. And when you ask questions, you quiet down at some point and receive answers. And we always receive answers. And the answers, if we still stay still and listen, we'll hear all the answers. We're just not really ever taught to do that. So it feels unnatural as an adult. And the only reason I even know to do this was because it felt like prayer a little bit. It would, silence your thoughts and connect with God and talk with God. So I grew up with that practice in church. And then my mom, being spiritual, telling me that that's how you manifest, is, meditating and focusing and the law of attraction and these things, and that they were all the same thing. And I really loved that. And Jesus was explaining to me when he showed up as Frank, that those were all the same things too. And maybe I'll finally dance into the story now of how I met this glorious, glorious being, Jesus, Yeshua, Frank, the light, the one, the way, Yeshua, Yahweh. I hope you enjoy listening to my stories. There's a lot of, he brings me a lot of souls to communicate with, to teach me with. He's still a teacher. He's very much a teacher, very much a teacher. And he very much respects your free will. He has to. It's a law. He has to follow all the laws. He has to be perfect. Remember, we demanded it before he came. He had to be perfect and sacrificed. So he agreed to that too. Oh, that's how he told me to trust him. I died for you freely. I really did. And tell me any other deity or any other, in your religion, in your known universe, mine anyway, of who's done that. And I couldn't think of anyone who has died for me. I knew my family has said they would, which I thought was very sweet and cryptic. But this guy really did, and I never asked him to, and I'm grateful that he did, and I don't understand why he had to. And it traumatized me to see him. It really did. It traumatized me to see him every single day like that, to the point it drove a wedge between us a bit. And it was a huge guilt trip that I somehow had something to do with killing this guy, when he was also my imaginary friend, and he was the nicest guy. And I'm going to tell that story too, how my imaginary friend, Jesus, started showing up when I was a child, and what that vision looked like for me when I could see him. And okay, here's the story. I don't know how far back I'm going to start. I am going to preface by saying the initiate to calling in the Jesus for me, or recalling in the Jesus, because he had already been called in through Catholicism, whether they meant to or not, it did. I had had bouts with suicidal ideations, thoughts after that event, after that attack, after that manipulation, after that trickery, after that abuse, after that really confusing and scary ordeal of years of this man peeking in my window while I'm sleeping, and me trying to ignore him because no one believes he's there. Story of my life, right? But I look back at it all, and I just see how it was so divinely orchestrated that it just fell through the cracks, and it did the way it did so that I could connect with others, because that was a big secret for my life. In my life, it was a secret I hid for many, many years. I didn't tell my mom about what that neighbor had done to me until I was 21. I believe it was my 21st birthday. My mom and I were at dinner, and I just told her. And it felt so good to finally say it to someone, even though he'd been dead for, I guess, only like 3 or 4 years at that point. Whew. So it was still kind of fresh. And there was not much of an internet or anything back then, so I don't even know if I knew he was dead. So I only found out he was dead, I think. Gosh, I don't remember. What's crazy is I recently found the house on online, that they sold it finally, and someone bought it. And so there were all these pictures. Wow. What a crazy time to be able to just go online and see the house, see the monster house from your childhood, where your innocence was stolen from you, tricked from you, raped from you. As children, girls are told, and through Catholicism with the Virgin Mary, even though she had other children, she still died a virgin somehow. According to Catholicism, they don't address that, nor does Jesus have other siblings, or at least not when I was little. Yeah, go look all that up. That is, Jesus had siblings. They're mentioned in the Bible. With Joseph. Mary had more kids with Joseph. But this is the conditioning that girls are brought up with, that we are only worth our virginity, our purity, and to keep it as long as possible, and to wait until marriage. And boys are raised to have sex with as many girls as possible. So where do we meet up with that? That's our programming. That's toxic masculinity, and it's toxic femininity, because I am not just my virginity, or lack thereof. So, it was really hard for me growing up when my girlfriends would talk about boys. So it would immediately trigger that MF. And it was really hard when my friends would talk about boys and sexual experiments and sexual encounters and sexual fantasies. And I'm talking just really innocent, even first kisses, holding hands, touching. And it would immediately trigger that man, and how uncomfortable I was with all of it, and how it was against my will and a breach. And how scared I was, because, and this is where I would disassociate when talking with friends. And then they think I was weird, because sometimes I'd start crying and they're like, "Why? What's wrong with you?" And sometimes I'd tell them what happened. And then sometimes right after that, I'd never hear from them again. And they'd say, I made it up, or or I was gross, or I said stories, or they just didn't want to be my friend anymore. And that's why friend Ghosty was a good friend of mine, because I'd come home from sleepovers all triggered from girls talking about boys and asking if you've ever been kissed or if you've had a kiss or if you've ever kissed a boy. And I don't want to lie, but what do you say? Yeah, the guy up the street from me sexually abuses me and sexually harasses me and manipulates me into situations where I have to see him. And he's really good at getting me alone. And he's military trained. He's an ex-Vietnam veteran. He's a Purple Heart hero recipient. He's also very angry and very sad, and I felt bad for him. And it's weird. He has no face in my memories. I have no idea what he looks like. And I'm so glad there's no image of him online, because I'm not sure what it would do to my brain to see him again. It's just scribbled out. There's just black scribbled over his face. I can't see it. I can't see it. And it's weird because I even confronted him when I was 14. We just happened to be in the area. My parents took me to see Les Miserables. And I was obsessed with musicals. I want to be able to talk about also the parallel that Jesus has been showing me of how everything that I went through, the scary, scary, scary stuff, at the exact same time, I was also having really incredible opportunities manifest. And my husband and I were just talking about some of these things today, just incredible manifestations I've been able to create my entire life, starting off with being in kindergarten, landing the lead role in the Nutcracker. And I don't even know how I got it and how terrifying it was and how amazing it was and how scary it was and how exciting it was and how beautiful it was. And I got to dress up and I got to be on stage and all the people clapped and I looked really pretty. And it was the evening and I had a really pretty velvet dress on and I got to dance with this boy. And I think I was five or six, four, gosh, I don't know. So, and after that event, the next day I had made the cover of the newspaper, the Monterey News, and we still have the news article. And that snowballed into a lot of opportunities where things like that happened repeatedly throughout my life of getting leading opportunities and really incredible recognitions and opportunities to show my arts while I'm also hiding a gigantic secret of the abuse that I was hiding and also battling intense rage and a huge inability to connect with my own family because this man had psychologically abused me and psychologically manipulated me with all of the events that it was my fault or that family members could also do what he was doing. And it made me not want to connect to my family members, which were primarily men. My mother and I were the only females in the family. And while my whole family is wonderful, they're beautiful people, not a single one of them were predators. What that man put in my head robbed me of an ability to have a connection with a lot of people. So I really learned to tune into my ghost friends, the voices in my head, and the friend Ghosty, and the dead loved ones that would come even after I told friend Ghosty to go away. There was still, I always felt something was there. Whether it's a deceased grandmother or deceased neighbor visiting me in my dreams or feeling their presence to the point where I bring them up and then learn something new about them that had manifested that day. I've had this ability. And what Jesus has told me is the gift is found in trauma. And one of the first traumas that I encountered upon being born was I was born with a weird congenital hip issue, and it caused my hip to grow the different lengths. And my mother noticed when I was about 18 months old that one of my legs was literally like 2 inches longer than the other. And she was like, oh man. And I was walking in circles when I was learning to walk because my legs were so off. So she took me to Stanford Hospital in California, Stamford. Maybe it's Stamford. It's not the Connecticut one. Down in Los Angeles, down in Santa Barbara. I think that was the area. And I was in 6 weeks of traction at 18 months old, and I stopped talking, and I had to have surgery and radiation. And like I said, I was in traction for 6 weeks, and my mom had said that I really regressed in talking. And what my trauma therapist and her mentor told me, and what Jesus has said also, was that's where I learned to disassociate. It was incredible pain and aching in my legs to do these manipulations and this traction. Such intense aching that's never gone away. I've had it my entire life. And now my other hip is not doing so great since I finally had the one hip replaced. It's overcompensating with the one good one. Now it's like, you need to replace me now too. And that's fine. It'll happen. But during that time, those 6 weeks, I was in the hospital. I lived there. I was 18 months old, and my older brother was like, "Where's my little sister?" We were buddies, and I was so depressed. I was so sad at the hospital, and I really, really disassociated quite a bit there. And so that's where we've kind of come to the conclusion that that's where I learned to tune in to the veil, to see my friend ghosties, and to see the Lord, and to see the ghosts, and to see the beings and the angels reassuring me that everything's going to be okay. That everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And I would just tune into them, and also being a medium and being able to sense spirits. I think being in that children's hospital, obviously, where else would Jesus hang out but a children's hospital? Jesus has told me since I've been trying to kill myself that we're going to do a living life review. We're going to clean up all of this before I cross over, because he's told me that when you cross over with a lot of gunk, this is gunk. If you cross over with a lot of those things, you could want to reincarnate to address them. And it causes a lot of psychosis because you no longer have a grounded 3D physical vessel really filtering out a lot of the emotions. So emotions and triggers are memories, and they trigger old memories of a program. So when someone triggers you for whatever they say about whatever, it has to do with a program that's rubbing against you that you're freaking out about. And we do that often here. And that's an opportunity for us to kind of look at it and say, "Oh, what's that? And why is it happening? And what's going on? And how can I address it? And how can I feel better about it?" So in July of 2015, I I was I was at a real low point with my husband, and we were just emotionally spent. And I had a suicide attempt, a pretty severe one, in 2014, where I was also psychiatrically inpatient for at least a week evaluation. I think I might have been there 2 weeks because it was a serious attempt. I took a lot of pills, and I didn't wake up for a while. And while I was gone, I saw Archangel Michael, and I went into this kingdom, this arena, and I came into it, and there were all these angels all above me, all around me, and they wouldn't speak to me, and they were looking at me, and they wouldn't make eye contact with me. And I was looking around at them, and I was saying, "Why aren't you helping me? Why won't you help me?" And they wouldn't speak to me, and they wouldn't look at me, but they were facing me. And then finally, Archangel Michael stepped forward and told me, "You must ask for our help. We are not allowed to help you. And you have blocked off help. You must open up and allow our assistance, or we cannot assist." And he pushed me back down to my body, and he said, "You must go back," because I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to go back. He said I had to go back, and I was really mad. I was really mad. And he sent me back, and I felt the full weight of my body when I woke up. I felt the full weight of that sad bitch. She was still really pissed and pretty sick of her programming and ready to initiate dump, delete mode, clean up, defrag hard drive, install Jesus. And that's what has occurred, folks. That's what has occurred. And now I'm full on Jesus freak. And here's my story. That concludes part 1 of my telling of how I met Frank, who Frank is. And if you tune into episode 2, you'll hear the conclusion and the delightful telling of Frank the Messiah.